I started as an electrical engineer. I have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in electrical engineering. And I was interested in designing circuits, building things. And in those days, engineers thought of people as a nuisance, that if somebody, my circuits worked just perfectly fine if only people wouldn't get in the way and misuse them. As I was in graduate school in electrical engineering, however, I was more and more interested in this new field called computers. And I was at the University of Pennsylvania in graduate school. I had come from MIT as an undergraduate. And at Penn was where the first digital computers were built in the United States. And I said, that's why I went to Penn, to learn more about computers. But it turns out nobody was there working on computers. The people who had done the original computers were gone off. They started their own company, which eventually became called Remington Rand UNIVAC. The UNIVAC was the magical computer that everybody thought was so powerful. It had 1,000 words of memory. Not 1,000 words, not kilobytes, not megabytes, not gigabytes. Basically 1,000 words, that's all. And it filled up an entire room. But they weren't teaching that. And so just then I heard a lecture by the newly appointed chair of the Department of Psychology. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Instead of building an intelligent device, I will study intelligent devices, namely the human mind. And so I switched to psychology, and the new chair was a physicist. And he said, you don't know anything at all about psychology. Wonderful. And it was a new discipline called mathematical psychology, trying to change the nature of psychology to be more evidence-driven, more scientific, more theoretical. And that's where I got my degree. And after I got my degree, I went to Harvard. I was on the faculty briefly at Harvard until UCSD started. And then I was invited to come and join UCSD in 1966, which was no one had yet graduated. So I was one of the first, probably 100 or so faculty at UCSD. I was in psychology, and I was trying to study how we remember things, how we attend to things, and how we learn things. And it's complex, but as I stayed in psychology longer, I thought it was too narrow a field, that psychologists had their own way of working and their own problems. And I wanted to be able to be broader, to bring in more neuroscience. I wanted to bring in sociology and anthropology. I wanted to bring in computer science and artificial intelligence, and I couldn't do it in psychology. So what I eventually did was started an Institute for Cognitive Science, and then that became the Department of Cognitive Science. And so I was the starting chair of that one. I was one of the co-founders and then the first chair, but I also got more and more interested in applying my work. What happened was there was a big accident in a nuclear power plant called 3 Mile Island. And I was called in part to analyze why things had gone wrong. Why did the operators make such horrible mistakes? And I was on this wonderful committee, and we really looked at lots of things, and we finally decided that the operators were very intelligent. They did the most sensible things they could think of, given the circumstances and given what all the 4,000 meters and gauges they had in front of them was trying to indicate. And we said, if you wanted to design a system that caused errors, you could not have done a better job than what they did in designing these plants. And that made me realize that the way you design plants and the way you designed equipment was really, really important, that people played a very essential role. In fact, without the people, why are we doing it? We're doing it for people. And yet we design things that people can't use. We make confusing things with 4,000 meters and controls. And engineers like to say, oh, we need to control these 25 variables. So we'll order 25 switches and we'll put them in a nice, neat, long line. So they look pretty. And then they complain when somebody hits switch number 23 instead of 24. Come on. So that made me realize that my background in psychology, about understanding human beings and human behavior, and my background in engineering was a great combination. And so I got very much interested in designing equipment that people could use and in human error. And I, in fact, wrote some important early papers on human error that's still valid today. As I got more and more interested in applying my knowledge, I started, and the computers revolution was just starting in Silicon Valley. And I have been using computers, well, forever. Starting with the UNIVAC, which had 1,000 words of memory, but then moving to the smaller Digital Equipment Corporation. The company doesn't exist anymore, but through a number of smaller machines. And my laboratory at UCSD had a big digital computer. In fact, we had two of them for a while, big ones. And I got more and more interested in what was happening in Silicon Valley. And then the university went through a bad period. I had been at the university 27 years at this point. And so they started offering early retirement. Eventually, I decided on the third time they offered it that, yeah, let me go up to Silicon Valley. So I retired. The chancellor of the university, Dick Atkinson, who was a good friend of mine, came to me and said, no, we didn't want you to. But I went up and got a job at Apple, where I became first an Apple Fellow, which was a really neat job because it had no requirements, no responsibilities, but was treated as if you were a vice president. But I could do anything I wanted. And because I didn't have any responsibilities, I could go talk to the lowest level programmer and the CEO. I could just walk into his office, anybody's office. People invited me. But I couldn't get anything done as much because I didn't have any authority. And so eventually I switched and became vice president of the Advanced Technology Lab, which is basically the research lab. And then I had a lot of control and authority over my people, but actually then people wouldn't talk to me. Then I'd go to lowly programmers, no, a vice president, no, he won't talk to you. And then I had to make an appointment to see the CEO, even though I reported to the CEO. Very strange business. That's where I discovered design. I was doing design before, but there I discovered real designers. There were several real people who today are very well known. Bob Brunner, who's a major designer today, and Johnny Ive, who everybody in the world has heard of. But they did industrial design, which meant they studied they made the cases, and they did beautiful jobs, but they actually didn't understand people. And so there was a group that was doing user interface design when I joined Apple. In fact, it had been started by one of my former students. And there was an Apple design book about the user interface design. In fact, I have it somewhere here on my shelf here. And it was written by one of my former students. And the machine they were just bringing out was the first version of the Macintosh. And I discovered to my surprise that one of the lead people running the project had taken my course at UCSD, which we call cognitive engineering. So I felt quite at home at Apple. But Apple was having difficulties then, because even though we made the very best computer in the world, the Macintosh, it was not selling well. We were losing money. And basically, we were almost bankrupt. And so we went through 4 or 5 CEOs. And it's interesting. We once invited Bill Gates down to come and tell us what he would have done, because Microsoft was our big competitor. And Bill said basically that it was our own fault, that we should be the dominant company. And he listed the 4 or 5 major mistakes we had made in marketing the computer. And he was right. And somebody asked him, well, why do you hate Apple so much? And he said, we don't hate Apple. You hate us. We don't hate you. In fact, he said, we make more money off every Apple computer sold than you do, because you hardly make any money when you sell a computer. We make quite a bit because we sell them the entire Microsoft Office package. But in any event, I left Apple. It was going downhill, was gone. When Steve Jobs came back, if you were a vice president, you were gone. He basically started over again. So I tell people he fired me, but it wasn't personal. He didn't know me. I won't give you the rest of the story, but I did various things. I started my own company, a consulting company. I followed a customer to Chicago to start a new company. So I was president of a startup, which didn't succeed. And then I went to Northwestern and became a professor of computer science, but started the Siegel Design Institute. And so we started teaching design to students, and I taught design to MBA students as well. And so I was really excited by what we were calling human-centered design. Now, human-centered design has started in many different places, but one of them that started was at UC San Diego. We wrote a book called User-Centered System Design in 1987. User-Centered System Design, UCSD. So And I wrote the book, The Design of Everyday Things. It was first called The Psychology of Everyday Things, before I left UCSD. So I was already in design, but I didn't know the design field. But I started to learn about it at Apple, and then I continued learning even more about it when I was at Northwestern. Eventually, I retired from Northwestern, so I retired now and went back to live in Palo Alto, where I was really busy. I was traveling around the world, giving lectures. I was a consultant, advisor to many, many different companies, and very busy. When Pradeep Khosla, the chancellor at UCSD, came to my home in Palo Alto and said that we're trying to start a design group, would I come down and start it? And I said, no, I'm very busy and I'm happy. I don't want a job. I don't need a job. He came to my home 3 times, and I then visited him here, visited him at UCSD. And then finally I said, okay. And there were 2 friends of mine who I'd known for a long time, both of them in cognitive science, Jim Holland and Scott Clemmer. And so they helped convince me to come down, and the 3 of us started what we then decided to call the Design Lab. Now, what should the Design Lab do? Well, there's traditional design, which makes these beautiful products that we all love and enjoy, and how beautiful the Apple computers themselves are. And we said, we don't have the right kind of talent to do that. And moreover, there's lots of good places that teach that. You don't need another one. So what we wanted to do, we said, was to treat design as a way of thinking that can solve really important, critical societal problems. It's not just making another product, not just making another thing, but it's trying to understand what the real difficulties are. And that's what we decided to focus on. Now, we started with the people that we had. They were primarily the students of Scott Clemmer and of Jim Holland. And they were in the field that's called human-computer interaction, a field that I also was heavily involved in the very beginning of starting. So, I mean, I've started several fields. I've started human information processing psychology, which became cognitive psychology. I've helped start cognitive science, was the chair of the first department, was editor of the journal, chair of the society, helped start the society. And now I'm in design. We want to start doing a new kind of design. Design, we call it, for the 21st century, where we really hit major societal issues. We started with, I said, the human-computer interaction group, but Scott Clemmer was particularly interested in how people learn and devising computer-assisted learning tools. And Jim Holland is interested in graphics, interactive graphics that really help you do much more than you could do anything else without. It isn't just a pretty picture, but it's something that really is a tool that you can use to think better and create better. The administration treated us very well and eventually gave us 5 positions that we could hire. So that were 6 positions. We filled 4 of them, and we're still working on it. And so we started with just a small group. We now have about 30 faculty associated with us. We have about 200 people in total. You take the undergraduates and graduate students, and then we have visiting fellows, designers from the area. And I think we are starting to be known as something that's doing something different.